Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at Helicobacter pylori.
Helicobacter pylori.
Yeah, and it's a bacteria that lives in the stomach.
It does.
About half the world's population has it.
It's incredibly common.
And we're going to be taking a look at some sources that we have about it. We have some medical articles, we've got some YouTube videos, and we even have a website for a digestive health center.
Very cool.
So that'll be interesting.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I guess we should start by
Yeah.
explaining just what is H. pylori.
Sure.
So it's a bacteria that lives in the stomach, which is already kind of a fascinating thing because the stomach is a
Oh,
very
exactly.
harsh environment.
Yeah, very acidic.
Very acidic.
Well,
Most bacteria could not survive there.
right.
But H. pylori has evolved some special adaptations.
Well, one of the things that I read about it was that it's spiral shaped.
Yes, it is. It has a kind of corkscrew shape.
And that actually helps it to kind of burrow into the lining of the stomach.
Yeah.
That's right. It helps it to move through the mucus layer
Right.
of the stomach and get down to the cells where it wants to live.
Right. So it's not just floating around in there. It's actually
Well,
attaching.
Yeah, it's not just passing through.
Wow.
It wants to set up shop.
Okay. And I know that a lot of the time people get it during childhood,
That's right. It's often acquired in childhood.
but they might not have symptoms right away.
Right. It can be dormant for years or even decades.
And how is it spread? I mean, do we even know?
It's not entirely clear, but it's thought to be spread through contaminated food and water.
Okay. So making sure that you wash your hands and, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Good hygiene is important.
Right. Okay.
And then, even though many people don't have symptoms,
Right.
it can cause some serious problems.
Yeah. I read that it can actually lead to ulcers
Yes, that's right.
and peptic ulcers.
Yeah, and gastritis,
And gastritis. Yeah.
even cancer in some cases.
That's right. It's a risk factor for stomach cancer.
Ah,
So even though it might be asymptomatic for some time, it could.
it's not something to take lightly.
Yeah, it could eventually lead to something more serious.
Right.
So it's kind of amazing that this bacteria can survive in the stomach.
It is, yeah.
How does it do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so acidic.
It's amazing.
So how does it do that?
Well, one of its key survival strategies is that it produces an enzyme called urease. Urease. And what urease does is it takes urea, which is a waste product in our bodies that ends up in the stomach,
Right.
and it converts it into ammonia.
Ammonia.
Now, ammonia is a base, so it neutralizes acid. So basically, it's creating a little bubble of,
A little safe space.
yeah, a little safe space around itself where the pH is not so acidic.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like it brings its own little antacid with it.
Exactly. It's like a little walking antacid factory.
That's so cool. So that's how it survives the acid, but
That's one way.
yeah.
But it has other tricks up its sleeve as well.
Like well, for one thing, it has these things called flagella, which are like little tails
Yeah.
that help it to move around in the stomach.
So it can swim around in there.
It can swim around, yeah.
Wow. And it also has these adhesion molecules, which are basically like little hooks that help it to attach to the stomach lining.
Right, so it doesn't get washed away.
Oh, wow. So it's really good at staying put.
It's very good at staying put, yeah.
So it can survive the acid, it can move around, and it can attach. So it's really well equipped to live in the stomach.
It is, yeah. It's a very successful bacteria, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, because as we said, it can cause some problems.
Right.
So now that we know that it exists in the stomach and how it survives,
Right.
how do we even know if we have it?
Well, that's a good question because, as we said, a lot of people don't have any symptoms.
Right.
So you might not even know you have it unless you get tested.
So what kind of tests are there?
There are a few different tests. One is a blood test,
Okay.
which looks for antibodies to H. pylori in your blood.
So your body's actually...
Your body's immune system will produce antibodies
Right.
if it detects H. pylori.
Tried to fight it off.
Right.
Okay.
And then there's also a stool test.
The stool test.
Yeah, where they look for antigens from H. pylori in your stool.
Okay, that makes sense. And
And then the gold standard for diagnosis is an endoscopy.
endoscopy.
Yeah, have you ever heard of an endoscopy?
I have. I've never had one, but
It sounds worse than it is.
yeah.
Basically, they put a thin, flexible tube down your throat
Okay.
with a camera on the end,
Okay.
and they can look at the lining of your stomach
Correctly.
directly. And they can even take biopsies if they need to.
Okay. And so if they see signs of H. pylori,
Right.
then they'll know for sure.
They'll know for sure.
Okay. But that sounds a little invasive. I mean,
It is a little invasive.
is there any other way to know for sure?
There's something called a urea breath test.
A urea breath test.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, remember how we said that H. pylori produces urease?
Yeah, the little antacid bubble maker.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they give you a special solution to drink that contains urea.
Okay.
And if you have H. pylori in your stomach,
Mm.
the urese will break down the urea
Okay.
and produce carbon dioxide.
Okay.
And then they have you breathe into a bag.
Okay.
And they measure the amount of carbon dioxide in your breath.
And if there's a lot of carbon dioxide, that
That means you've got H. pylori.
Okay, wow. That's pretty clever.
It is pretty clever. Yeah.
So there are a few different ways to test for it.
Right.
But I'm interested to learn more about, if you do have H. pylori,
Yeah.
what are the treatment options?
Well, that's what we'll talk about next time.
All right, stay tuned.
Sounds good.
So last time we were talking about how to test for H. pylori.
Right. Right.
And we know that it can cause ulcers and gastritis and even cancer.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty stuff.
But I'm curious to know, what are the treatment options?
Well, the good news is that H. pylori infections are treatable, usually with a combination of antibiotics and medications that reduce stomach acid.
So antibiotics to kill the bacteria
Exactly.
and acid reducers to kind of soothe the stomach and let it heal.
Yep, that's the basic idea.
So I guess the first question is, how do you choose the right antibiotics?
Well, there are a few different antibiotics that are commonly used to treat H. pylori,
Okay.
like amoxicillin, clarithromycin, metronidazole.
Those are some big words.
Yeah, they are. But basically, they all work in different ways to kill the bacteria.
Okay. So amoxicillin, how does that one work?
Amoxicillin prevents the bacteria from building their cell walls.
So it can't protect itself.
Right, exactly. And then clarithromycin interferes with protein synthesis.
Protein synthesis.
Yeah, basically it stops the bacteria from being able to make the proteins it needs to survive.
Ah, okay.
And metronidazole, it damages the bacteria's DNA.
Wow. So it's like a multi-pronged attack.
Yeah, you're hitting it from all sides.
You're not giving it a chance.
Right.
So how do you know which antibiotic to use?
Well, it depends on a few factors, like your medical history,
Okay.
any allergies you might have,
Right.
and also the prevalence of antibiotic resistance in your area.
Antibiotic resistance, yeah. That's something I heard about, but I don't really understand.
Yeah, it's a growing problem.
So what is antibiotic resistance?
Basically, it means that the bacteria have evolved to become resistant to the effects of the antibiotics.
Oh, so the antibiotics don't work anymore.
Right. They might not work as well,
Ah.
or they might not work at all.
So how does that happen?
Well, it happens when bacteria are exposed to antibiotics over and over again.
Okay.
And the ones that survive are the ones that are resistant.
Right.
And then they multiply and pass on their resistance to their offspring.
So it's like survival of the fittest.
Exactly.
Only the strong survive.
Right. And the more we use antibiotics,
Right.
the more likely we are to create resistant strains.
So it's important to use antibiotics responsibly.
Absolutely.
Don't overuse them.
Right.
And always finish the full course of antibiotics that your doctor prescribes.
Even if you start feeling better before you finish all the pills.
Right. Because there might still be some bacteria hanging around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you kill them all.
So we've talked about antibiotics,
Right.
but are there any other treatment options for H. pylori?
Well, in addition to antibiotics, doctors often prescribe medications that reduce stomach acid.
Okay, so like proton pump inhibitors.
Yeah, exactly. Like omeprazole or lansoprazole.
Okay.
These medications help to create a less acidic environment in the stomach,
Okay.
which can help the ulcers heal.
So it's like giving your stomach a break from all that acid.
Right, exactly.
And allowing it to kind of repair itself.
Yep.
So it's a combination of antibiotics and acid reducers. That's
Wow.
the standard treatment for H. pylori.
That's the standard treatment.
Okay.
And,
But sometimes it's not enough.
oh, what do you mean?
Well, sometimes the bacteria are resistant to the antibiotics.
Or sometimes people have side effects from the medications.
Okay, that makes sense.
So what happens then?
Well, in those cases, doctors might try different combinations of antibiotics,
Okay.
or they might increase the dosage,
Right.
or they might try a longer course of treatment.
Okay. And are there any natural treatments for H. pylori?
That's a good question. There's actually been a lot of research on natural treatments for H. pylori,
Okay.
and some of them have shown some promising results.
Like what?
Well, for example, there's some evidence that probiotics
Probiotics, yeah.
can be helpful.
How do those work?
Well, probiotics are live bacteria that are beneficial to our health,
Okay.
and they can help to restore the balance of bacteria in our gut.
Okay, so they're like the good guys.
Exactly. They're the good guys.
And they help to fight off the bad guys.
Right.
Okay. And what about other natural treatments?
Well, there are a few others that have shown some promise, like green tea.
Green tea, really?
Yeah, green tea contains compounds that have antibacterial properties. So it can actually kill the bacteria.
It can, yeah. And honey has also been shown to have some antibacterial effects.
Honey. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, honey is a natural antiseptic.
Okay. And are these natural treatments as effective as antibiotics?
Well, that's a good question. The research is still ongoing,
Okay.
but some studies have shown that natural treatments can be effective in combination with antibiotics.
Okay, so they can kind of work together.
Right, they can work together to help eradicate the infection.
Okay. And
But it's important to talk to your doctor
right.
before trying any natural treatments.
Right. 'Cause
That's right.
they might not be right for everyone.
Exactly. And they could even interact with other medications you're taking.
Okay. So it's always best to talk to your doctor first.
Always.
Okay. So we've talked about the treatment options for H. pylori,
Right.
and we know that it's a serious condition that can lead to ulcers and gastritis and even cancer.
Yeah, it's not something to take lightly.
But I'm curious to learn more about the history of H. pylori.
The history of H. pylori.
Yeah, like how was it discovered?
Well, that's a fascinating story.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It all started in the 1980s
Okay.
with two Australian scientists,
Okay.
Barry Marshall and Robin Warren.
Wow, it's amazing how much we've learned about H. pylori in just a couple of deep dives. From its survival tactics to its discovery and the different treatment approaches, it really makes you appreciate the complexity of this tiny bacterium.
It really does. And as we've discussed, the story of H. pylori is far from over-reasoning. Scientists are still unraveling its mysteries, exploring new treatment approaches, and even investigating potential ways to prevent infection in the first place.
That's right. And speaking of the future, I'm curious to know what's on the horizon for H. pylori research. Are there any groundbreaking developments or promising areas of exploration that you're particularly excited about?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot to be excited about. One area that holds immense potential is the development of an H. pylori vaccine.
A vaccine. That would be incredible. But I imagine it's not an easy feat, considering the challenges we've discussed, like antibiotic resistance and the bacteria's ability to evade the immune system.
You're absolutely right. It's a complex challenge. But scientists have been working on this for decades, and there have been some encouraging advancements in recent years. Some early trials have shown that a vaccine can effectively reduce the incidence of H. pylori infection, particularly in children.
That's promising news. Can you tell us a bit more about how these vaccines work? What are they targeting?
Well, there are different approaches being explored. Most H. pylori vaccines aim to train the immune system to recognize and attack the bacteria more effectively. Essentially, they expose the body to specific components of H. pylori, like proteins or sugars, triggering an immune response that can neutralize the bacteria or prevent it from attaching to the stomach lining.
So it's like giving the immune system a sneak peek at the enemy so it's ready to fight back.
Exactly. And some vaccines also target proteins that H. pylori uses to survive in the harsh acidic environment of the stomach, making it more vulnerable.
It's fascinating how scientists are finding such clever ways to target this bacterium. But even with promising vaccine developments, there are still people currently living with H. pylori. What advancements are being made in terms of treatments for them?
That's a crucial area of focus, and scientists are constantly searching for new and improved treatment options, particularly for those dealing with antibiotic-resistant strains. One promising avenue, as we touched upon earlier, is phage therapy.
Phage therapy. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, using viruses to fight bacteria.
It might sound futuristic, but it's a very real and exciting field of research, and it has the potential to revolutionize the way we treat bacterial infections, including those caused by H. pylori.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of H. pylori and feel empowered to take proactive steps to protect their digestive health.
Knowledge is power, and we encourage everyone to stay curious about the fascinating world within us. Remember, simple preventive measures like good hygiene and mindful eating can go a long way in safeguarding your health.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the intriguing world of H. pylori. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those digestive systems happy and healthy.